Everyone thought my dad was losing his mind, but last weekend, behind closed doors, I stumbled upon the dark secret he's been carrying alone for 5 years. Seeing my mother run her fingers through my married cousin's hair proved one thing: my dad's depression isn't a sickness. It's the result of a cruel betrayal he's been forced to watch in silence. But why? Why would a mother throw away a perfect home and her children's future for such a forbidden affair? How did my father endure this humiliation day after day, only to end up on the brink of total collapse? And where does this twisted betrayal end? In a shattered family, or in an even darker tragedy? What else is hiding behind my father's ramblings and my mother's secret games? To find the answers and uncover the suffocating reality of this family nightmare, I'm Sneha, and I'm here to take you through it all. Let's dive into the full story. It's Bay Street, the heartbeat of Toronto's financial district. It's loud, it's chaotic, and God, do I love it. The constant hum of servers, the shouting across the trading floor, the aggressive honking of taxis 40 floors down. It's music to me. Why? Because the noise drowns out the silence, the suffocating, heavy, dead silence that waits for me back home. My name is Sneha. I'm 28, a senior financial analyst, and to the outside world, I am the poster child for the immigrant dream. You know the type: good job, nice apartment downtown, designer handbags, and a family that lives in a sprawling, beautiful property by the lake in Hamilton. On Instagram, we look perfect. We look like we made it. But if you scratch just a little bit of the paint off that perfect picture, you'll find the wood underneath is rotting, it's black, it's decaying, and it smells like death. It was last Friday when the cracks finally shattered the foundation. I remember leaving the office around 4 p.m. The sky over Toronto was that bruised shade of purple and grey, threatening a storm that hadn't quite broken yet. I got into my car, threw my bag in the passenger seat, and merged onto the Gardner Expressway. The traffic was bumper to bumper, a sea of red taillights bleeding into the horizon. Usually I hate the traffic, but that day I wanted it to last forever. I wanted the gridlock to hold me there, trapped between concrete and steel, just so I wouldn't have to reach my destination. I was heading to Hamilton, to that house. Most people go home to recharge. I go home to enter a war zone, but it's not a war fought with screaming or throwing plates. No, that would be easier. Screaming implies passion. Screaming implies that someone still cares enough to be angry. In my parents' house, we are fighting a cold war, a war of silence that has lasted for 5 long, agonising years. As I drove past the Burlington Skyway, the massive bridge that separates the chaos of the GTA from the industrial grit of Hamilton, I felt that familiar knot tighten in my stomach. It's a physical reaction I've developed over the years. My heart rate spikes, my palms get sweaty against the steering wheel, and a low-level nausea sets in. It's the body's way of saying, don't go there, turn around. Our house is located in Stony Creek, right near the water. It's isolated. When my father bought the land 10 years ago, he wanted privacy. He wanted a sanctuary. Now that privacy feels like a prison sentence. The neighbours are too far away to hear a scream. The road is too quiet. It's just us, the wind coming off Lake Ontario, and the secrets buried inside those brick walls. I pulled into the long gravel driveway. The house loomed ahead, dark against the twilight. It's a beautiful house, really. 2 stories, red brick, a manicured lawn that my father used to obsess over. But as I killed the engine, the silence of the area hit me like a physical blow. No birds, no cars passing by, just the rhythmic, dull crashing of the waves against the shore behind the house. I sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, taking a deep breath. Just get through the weekend, Sneha, I told myself. Just 2 days, check on Dad, ignore Mum, and get back to the city. I stepped out, the gravel crunching loudly under my boots. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. Mum? Dad? I called out as silence. The air inside the house always feels different, stale, heavy. It's like the oxygen is thinner here, weighed down by years of resentment. I walked into the living room, dropping my keys on the console table. To understand what happened next, you have to understand the layout of our lives. My parents, married for 35 years, have not spoken a single word to each other in half a decade. Not pass the salt, not good morning, nothing. My father, a man who once commanded rooms with with his laughter, now lives like a ghost in his own home. He sleeps in the guest room downstairs. My mother rules the master bedroom upstairs. They move around the house in a carefully choreographed dance to avoid ever being in the same room at the same time. It's exhausting just watching them. I found my father in the kitchen. He was sitting at the small breakfast table staring at a cup of tea that had gone cold long ago. The lights were off, the only illumination coming from the hallway. "Dad," I whispered. He jumped, his eyes snapping toward me. For a second, he didn't recognise me. That's been happening lately. The confusion, the fear. "Sneha." His voice was raspy, like he hadn't used it in days. "You came." "I told you I was coming, Dad," I said, flipping on the switch. The light flooded the room and I saw how much older he looked since I last saw him 2 weeks ago. His cheeks were sunken, his eyes rimmed with dark purple circles. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a year. He looked haunted. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. And he didn't say Mom. He never says her name anymore. It's always she or that woman. "I don't know, Dad. Upstairs, maybe?" He shook his head frantically, his hands trembling as he reached for the cold tea. No, she's not upstairs. She's plotting. She's always plotting with him. Him. The word hung in the air like toxic gas. I knew who he meant. We all knew. Steve, my cousin, my father's older brother's son. The man who is technically family, but has become the cancer eating us alive. "Dad, stop," I said, feeling that exhaustion settle into my bones. "Steve isn't here. It's Friday night. He's probably at home with his wife." My father let out a dry, bitter laugh that sounded more like a bark. "His wife? You think he cares about his wife? You think she cares?" He slammed his hand on the table, the china cup rattling dangerously. "They think I'm blind, Sneha. They think I'm crazy, but I hear them. I hear the whispers through the vents. I know what they do when they think I'm asleep." I sighed, opening the fridge to look for something to cook, trying to normalise the situation. This was the routine. Dad would spiral into his paranoia, claiming my mother was having an affair with Steve, a man her own age, her nephew by marriage. It sounded insane. It was insane. I had spent 5 years defending my mother, telling my father he needed therapy, that his suspicion was a symptom of a sick mind. "You don't believe me," he mumbled, staring at his hands. "My own daughter doesn't believe me." "It's not that, Dad," I said softly, closing the fridge. It's been 5 years. If something was going on, wouldn't we know? Wouldn't Steve's wife know? "She knows," he spat out. "Why do you think she stopped coming here? Why do you think the community talks? Everyone knows, Sneha. Everyone except you." I didn't have the energy to argue. I made him some fresh tea and toast, watched him eat like a starving child, and then sent him to his room. The guest room. I watched him shuffle down the hallway, his shoulders hunched, a broken man who used to be my hero. I went upstairs to my old room to change. I passed the master bedroom. The door was closed. I didn't knock. I haven't really spoken to my mother in months, not since the last time I tried to bridge the gap, and she told me to mind my own business. The house fell into that deep, unnerving quiet again. It was around 8 p.m. I decided to go down to the basement to check the laundry. To get to the basement, you have to pass the main formal living room, the room we rarely use. It's the showroom filled with expensive furniture that nobody sits on, facing the large bay windows that look out toward the lake. As I walked down the stairs, I heard a sound. It was faint, a soft rustling, like fabric moving against fabric. I froze on the bottom step, my heart hammered against my ribs. Dad was in his room with the door locked. I'd heard the click. Mum was supposed to be upstairs. Who was in the living room? I told myself it was the wind. The house is old, it settles, it makes noises, but then I heard it again. A low murmur, a voice. It wasn't my father's voice, it was deeper, smoother. "Steve?" No, it couldn't be. Why would he be here on a Friday night? His car wasn't in the driveway. I would have seen it. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, and it pulls you toward the edge of the cliff, even when you know you might fall. I took a step toward the living room archway. The room was dark, illuminated only by the moonlight spilling in through the sheer curtains and the faint glow of a street lamp from the road. I crept closer, my socks sliding silently on the hardwood floor. The air felt charged, electric, with a tension I couldn't name. I reached the archway and peeked inside. At first, my eyes had to adjust to the shadows. I saw the silhouette of the long velvet couch, and then I saw movement. 2 figures. One was lying down, stretched out casually. The other was sitting on the edge of the couch, leaning over. My breath hitched in my throat. I blinked, praying that it was just a shadow, a trick of the light, but the clouds outside shifted and a beam of pale moonlight cut across the room, illuminating them like actors on a stage. It was them. Steve was lying on his back, his hands behind his head, looking completely at home, and my mother, my dignified, strict religious mother, was sitting beside him. But it wasn't just that they were sitting there, it was what she was doing. Her hand was buried in his hair. She was stroking it gently, rhythmically, with a tenderness I hadn't seen her show my father in a decade. She was leaning down, whispering something into his ear, her face inches from his. I felt the blood drain from my face. My legs turned to jelly. This wasn't a conversation between an aunt and a nephew. This wasn't a handyman fixing a leak. This was intimate. This was lovers. The world tilted on its axis. Every argument my father had made, every paranoid rant, every tear he had shed over the last 5 years crashed into my mind at once. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't sick. He was right. I stood there, paralysed in the darkness of the hallway, watching the two people who destroyed my family without even knowing I was there. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. And then Steve shifted. He turned his head slightly, and for a split second, I thought he looked right at me. The air in the room grew suffocatingly thin. I was standing on the precipice of a nightmare, and I had just opened my eyes. The silence of the last 5 years was about to be broken, and I knew with a terrifying certainty that once this shattered, nothing, absolutely nothing would ever be the same again. What I saw in that room was just the beginning. If I thought the betrayal was bad, I had no idea how deep the rabbit hole really went. I didn't scream, I didn't gasp, I didn't storm into the room and flip the coffee table over. I did the only thing I knew how to do in that house. I became a ghost. I pressed my back against the cold drywall of the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Thump, thump, thump. It was so loud I was terrified they could hear it over the sound of the wind rattling the windows. I held my breath until my lungs burned, inching backward, one silent step at a time, until the darkness of the staircase swallowed me whole. I crept back up the stairs, my legs shaking so violently I had to grip the banister with white-knuckled force. When I finally reached the safety of my bedroom and closed the door, I collapsed against it, sliding down to the floor. I sat there in the dark, hugging my knees, trying to process the image burned into my retinas. My mother, her hand in his hair, the intimacy, the betrayal. But as the shock began to subside, it was replaced by something colder, sharper, rage, and then clarity. Suddenly, the last 15 years of my life replayed in my head like a film reel, but this time I was watching it with the right lens. I wasn't seeing a family drama anymore. I was watching a home invasion, a slow, methodical, psychological invasion by one man, Steve. To understand why that scene downstairs was so grotesque, you have to understand who Steve is. He isn't just a cousin. He isn't just a relative. He is a parasite. Steve is my father's older brother's son. In our culture, you respect your elders and you look out for your family. My father, the dutiful younger brother, took that to heart. When Steve immigrated to Canada a few years after us, my father opened his arms. He opened his wallet, and eventually he opened the front door. Steve is in his early 50s now, roughly the same age as my mother. He's always had this charm, a rugged, rough around the edges charisma that works on people who don't know him well. He drives a beat up pickup truck, wears leather jackets that are too young for him, and always smells of stale tobacco and cheap musk cologne. He's a drifter. He's never held a real 9-to-5 job in his life. He calls himself a contractor, but mostly he just drifts from one odd job to another, leaving a trail of unfinished projects and broken promises behind him. But for some reason, at our house, he was the golden boy. Growing up, Steve was always there. That's the only way to describe it. He was a permanent fixture in the background of our lives. If I came home from school on a Tuesday, Steve's truck was in the driveway. If we had a barbecue on a Saturday, Steve was at the grill, flipping burgers like he paid for the meat. It started innocently enough. He was helping. Steve is fixing the deck, Mum would say. Steve is taking a look at the plumbing, she'd tell Dad. My father, busy working 60-hour weeks to pay the mortgage on this massive house, was grateful at first. He didn't have time to fix the leaky faucet or paint the fence, so Steve did it. But slowly, the dynamic shifted. I remember one specific incident when I was 19. I'd come home from university for the summer. I walked into the kitchen and Steve was sitting at the head of the dining table, my father's seat. He was eating the lunch my mother had cooked, laughing loudly at something she said. My mother was standing by the stove, her face flushed, laughing with with him. It looked domestic. It looked like a husband and wife enjoying a meal. Then the front door opened. My father walked in, exhausted, still wearing his work boots, carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. The laughter in the kitchen stopped instantly. Steve didn't get up. He didn't offer the seat back. He just leaned back, picked his teeth with a toothpick and said, "Hey, Uncle, long day." It was a power move. Even at 19, I felt it. He was marking his territory. He was showing my father that while Dad paid the bills, Steve owned the room. My father had looked at Mum, waiting for her to say something, to tell Steve to move, to welcome her husband home. But she didn't. She just turned back to the stove and said, "There's food in the microwave if you're hungry." That was the beginning of the end. Sitting on my bedroom floor now in the dark, I realised how blind I had been. I had bought into the narrative my mother spun. For years, whenever Dad complained about Steve, Mum would sigh and tell me, "Your father is so insecure. He's jealous of his own nephew. It's pathetic, Sneha. Steve is just trying to help and your father treats him like a criminal." She spun it so well. She made Dad sound crazy. She made him sound like a paranoid, possessive tyrant who couldn't handle another man being useful around the house. And I believed her. I'm a financial analyst. I look at data. I look for patterns. How did I miss this pattern? Steve wasn't fixing the house. He was dismantling our family. He was the whisper in my mother's ear. He was the reason the guest room became my father's permanent bedroom. Every fight my parents had, Steve was somehow at the centre of it. Yet his hands were always clean. He was the reason Steve's own wife stopped coming over. My God, his wife. Auntie Rena, a quiet, sweet woman who aged 10 years in the last 5. I remember the last time I saw her. It was at a grocery store in Mississauga. She looked at me with eyes full of pity. She didn't ask how my parents were. She just held my hand and said, "Look after your father, Sneha. He's a good man. He doesn't deserve this." I thought she meant he didn't deserve the stress of work. Now I know she meant he didn't deserve the knife in his back. A creak from the hallway snapped me back to the present. I froze. My breath hitched. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps coming up the stairs. It wasn't the shuffling, hesitant walk of my father. This was confident. This was weight. I scrambled up from the floor and threw myself onto my bed, pulling the duvet up to my chin, feigning sleep. My heart was beating so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears like a waterfall. The footsteps reached the top of the landing. They paused right outside my door. I stared at the sliver of light coming from under the doorframe. A shadow blocked it. Someone was standing there. Was it Mum, checking if I was asleep, or was it him? A million terrifying thoughts raced through my mind. Did they see me? Did Steve see me peeking into the living room? Does he know I know? The doorknob turned. It was a slow, agonising, metallic groan. Scree. I squeezed my eyes shut, my hand gripping the bedsheet underneath the covers, preparing to scream, preparing to fight. The door opened a crack. "Sneha!" It was my mother's voice, but it wasn't her normal voice. It sounded tight, strained. There was an edge to it that I had never heard before. I didn't answer. I kept my breathing steady, forcing my body to mimic the rhythm of deep sleep. She stood there for what felt like an eternity. I could feel her eyes on me. I could feel the cold draft from the hallway drifting in. "I know you're awake," she whispered. The words hung in the air like a threat. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I committed to the lie. After another long, excruciating moment, she pulled the door shut. Click. I didn't exhale. I lay there, stone still, listening. I heard her footsteps move away from my room, but they didn't go to the master bedroom. They went back downstairs, back to him. I threw the covers off and rushed to the window, peering out through the blinds. The driveway was bathed in moonlight. Moments later, the front door opened. I saw Steve step out. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't sneaking out like a thief in the night. He walked with a swagger, lighting a cigarette as he stepped onto the porch. He took a long drag, the cherry of the cigarette glowing bright orange in the dark, and then he looked up. He looked straight up at my window. I ducked back instantly, pressing myself against the wall, my chest heaving. He knew. My father was right. He had been right for 5 years. The handyman had dismantled the foundation of this house while we were all sleeping inside it, and now the roof was about to collapse on all of us. I couldn't stay in this room. The walls felt like they were closing in. I needed to talk to Dad. I needed to see him. I needed to apologise. I opened my door again, stepping out into the hallway. The house was silent now. Steve was gone. Mum was somewhere. I tiptoed down the stairs, bypassing the living room. I couldn't bear to look at that couch again and headed toward the guest room at the back of the house. I reached for the handle of my father's door, ready to wake him up, ready to tell him, Dad, I believe you, but I saw them. But the door was locked. Dad, I whispered, knocking softly. Dad, it's me. Open up. No answer. Dad, please. Nothing. I pressed my ear against the wood. At first, I heard nothing, but then faintly from deep inside the room, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It wasn't snoring. It wasn't the TV. It was laughter. Low, manic, repetitive laughter. He sees them. He sees them. He sees them. My father was talking to himself, but the voice didn't sound like him. It sounded broken. It sounded like a man who had finally snapped. I backed away from the door, a fresh wave of horror washing over me. I wasn't just dealing with an affair anymore. I was dealing with the psychological destruction of a human being. I realised then that I couldn't just fix this. I couldn't just confront Mum and make it stop. The damage was already done. The poison was already in the veins. And as I stood there in the dark hallway, caught between my mother's betrayal and my father's madness, I realised something else. Steve wasn't just an intruder. He was the puppet master, and tonight he had cut the strings. To understand how he cut them and how my family bled out in front of everyone, we have to go back to the night where the silence began, back to the night of the wedding. Because if you think tonight was bad, you haven't heard about the reception. That was the night the monster didn't just show his face, he roared. If you want to pinpoint the exact moment a heart stops beating, you need an EKG. But if you want to pinpoint the exact moment a marriage dies, you just need a wedding video. Specifically, the raw footage from my younger sister Maya's wedding 5 years ago. That night was supposed to be the happiest night of my father's life. Instead, it was his public execution. The reception was held at one of those massive crystal chandelier banquet halls in Mississauga. You know the kind, gold-plated, everything, carpets that smell like industrial cleaner and curry, and enough flowers to bury a small army. It was a who's who of our community. 300 guests. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the heavy bass of Pangra music vibrating through the floorboards. I was the maid of honour. My dress was heavy, encrusted with beads that dug into my skin, but the real weight I was carrying was the tension radiating from my parents. By this point, Steve had already been infiltrating our lives for years, but he had always kept it somewhat low-key in public. But that night, Steve decided to step out of the shadows and into the spotlight. We arrived at the hall around 6 p.m. for the cocktail hour. My father was wearing a custom-tailored black tuxedo. He looked handsome, distinguished. He had spent months writing his speech. He had practiced it in front of the mirror every night. It was going to be his moment to tell Maya how much he loved her, to welcome his new son-in-law, to be the patriarch he had worked 40 years to become. But from the moment we stepped out of the limousine, the hijacking began. We walked into the lobby and there was Steve. He wasn't in the wedding party. He wasn't an usher, but there he was standing at the entrance of the ballroom, shaking hands with the guests as they arrived. Welcome. Good to see you. Come in, grab a drink. He was booming, clapping men on the back, kissing the aunties on the cheek. He was acting like the host. I looked at my father. He froze mid-step, his smile faltering. He watched his nephew doing his job. Dad tightened his jaw, adjusted his cufflinks and walked forward. Steve, Dad said, his voice tight. Why aren't you inside with the family? Steve didn't even flinch. He just flashed that greasy, charming smile. Just helping out, Uncle. You know how chaotic these things get. Someone has to steer the ship. But you go relax, grab a scotch. I got this. 3 words that stripped my father of his role. Dad wanted to argue, but guests were watching. The videographer was circling. So he swallowed his pride and walked inside. But it got worse. During the photography session, the photographer called for the immediate family photo. This is sacred. Parents, siblings, bride and groom. That's it. My father stood next to my mother, straightening his tie, a flicker of pride returning to his eyes. The photographer raised his camera. Suddenly, my mother waved her hand. Wait, Steve, come here. My stomach dropped. Steve jogged over from the bar, holding a whiskey glass. What's up? Get in the picture, Mum said, grabbing his arm and pulling him close. Mum, I hissed, leaning in. It's the immediate family shot. He is family, she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Don't be rude, Sneha. My father didn't say a word. He just stiffened. He looked like a statue made of ice. So, Steve squeezed in, but he didn't stand on the edge. He stood right between my mother and the groom. In the photo, the one that hangs in my mother's hallway to this day, my father is standing on the far left looking isolated while Steve and my mother are centre frame, their shoulders touching, smiling like they are the proud parents. It was subtle to outsiders. To us, it was a declaration of war. But the climax, the moment that truly shattered everything, was the speeches. Dinner was served. The lights were dimmed. The DJ announced the father of the bride speech. The room went quiet. A spotlight hit the head table. My father stood up. He looked tired, but he held his cue cards with a trembling hand. He walked to the podium. He tapped the microphone. Testing, 1, 2. A feedback squeal pierced the room. A few people chuckled. Dad looked flustered. He tried again. Ladies and gentlemen, wait. The mic cut out. Silence. Dad looked around helplessly at the AV guys. He tapped the mic again. Nothing. And then, from the darkness of the dance floor, a voice boomed out. Here, use this one. It was Steve. He had grabbed the wireless mic from the DJ booth, but instead of walking it over to my father, he stayed in the middle of the dance floor. He held the mic up, basking in the spotlight that swung over to him. While Uncle gets the tech sorted out, Steve said, his voice smooth, confident, amplified through the massive speakers. Let me just say a few words to fill the silence. My father stood at the podium, frozen, a man stranded on an island. Steve didn't just fill the silence, he stole the show. I remember when Maya was born, Steve said, pacing the floor like a talk show host, commanding the room. I remember running around the backyard with her. I remember teaching her how to ride a bike when her dad was busy at work. A few guests laughed. My father gripped the silent podium so hard his knuckles turned white. Busy at work? He was working to pay for that bike. He was working to pay for this wedding. Steve went on for 5 minutes. He told funny stories. He got sentimental. He toasted the couple. The crowd loved him. They clapped. They cheered. What a great guy, I heard someone whisper at the table behind me. When Steve finally finished, he raised his glass. To Maya and Raj, cheers! The room erupted in applause. The DJ started the music back up immediately. My father was still standing at the podium. Nobody noticed him. The moment was gone. The emotional climax of the wedding had been delivered by the wrong man. Dad slowly lowered his cue cards. He didn't make a scene. He didn't scream. He just placed the cards on the podium, turned around and walked out the back exit of the hall. I was the only one who followed him. I found him in the parking lot, standing in the dark behind a dumpster, smoking a cigarette. My father had quit smoking 20 years ago. Dad? I whispered. He didn't look at me. He was staring at the brick wall, tears streaming silently down his face. Not angry tears, defeated tears. I paid for the flowers, he whispered, his voice shaking. I paid for the dress. I paid for the wine they are drinking, and I couldn't even speak. Go back inside, Dad. Take the mic back. He shook his head. No. There is no point. She chose him. Did you see her face, Sneha? Did you see your mother watching him? She looked at him like he was the sun. Before I could answer, the back door banged open. My mother stormed out. She wasn't worried. She was furious. What are you doing? She hissed, marching up to him in her silk sari. People are asking where you are. You're embarrassing us. My father flicked the cigarette onto the pavement. I'm embarrassing you? He asked, his voice low, dangerous. That bastard just humiliated me in front of 300 people and you let him. He saved the moment, Mum yelled. The mic wasn't working. He covered for you. You should be thanking him, not sulking out here like a child. Thanking him? Dad stepped closer to her. He acted like he's her father. And you stood there smiling. Because he's family, Mum screamed. He's a good man, unlike you. Always jealous, always bitter. You're sick, do you know that? You have a sick mind. I have eyes, Dad roared. It was the loudest I had ever heard him scream. I see how you touch him. I see how you look at him. Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I don't know? The silence that followed was heavy. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears. Mum didn't deny it. She didn't say, no, that's crazy. She just looked at him with cold, dead eyes and said, if you say one more word about Steve, I will never forgive you. Then don't, Dad said, because I'm done. He walked past her, got into his car and drove away. He left his own daughter's wedding before the cake was cut. Mum didn't chase him. She fixed her hair, took a deep breath and went back inside to sit next to Steve. That was the night the wall went up. For the last 5 years, that wall has been impenetrable. Dad retreated to the guest room. Mum continued her life as if he didn't exist. Steve continued coming over, fixing things, laughing, drinking our tea, eating our food. But as I lay in my bed on Friday night, staring at the ceiling after seeing them in the living room, I realised that the wedding wasn't just a bad night. It was a coup. Steve hadn't just embarrassed my father. He had replaced him. And my father, he didn't leave because he was weak. He left because he knew he had already lost. But there was something else about that night that I'd forgotten until just now. A small detail. When Dad drove away, Steve had come out the back door a minute later. He saw me standing there watching Dad's taillights fade. He didn't look concerned. He lit a cigarette, the same brand Dad used to smoke, and looked at me. He'll be back, Steve had said, exhaling a cloud of smoke. He has nowhere else to go. This is my house now. I thought he was drunk then. I thought he meant my house figuratively, like he was in charge of the party. But lying in the dark of the Hamilton house with the sound of the wind howling off the lake, I realised he meant it literally. He wanted the house, he wanted the life, he wanted the wife, and now 5 years later he was close to getting it all. But why now? Why was the tension so high this specific weekend? I was about to find out. The next morning, Saturday, I woke up to the smell of bacon and coffee. It smelled normal, it smelled safe. I walked down to the kitchen hoping to find Dad. Instead, I found Steve. He was wearing an apron, my father's apron. He was standing at the stove flipping pancakes. Morning sunshine, he said, not even turning around. Sleep well. The way he said it, he knew I had seen them last night, and he was daring me to say something. But it wasn't Steve that scared me. It was what was sitting on the kitchen table, a stack of legal documents, thick, stapled papers with blue covers. I squinted at the text on the front page, last will and testament, and next to it, a power of attorney form. My blood ran cold. Dad wasn't just being replaced emotionally, they were making it legal. And where was Dad? I looked around. Where is he? I asked, my voice trembling. Steve turned around, a spatula in his hand, that same wolfish grin on his face. Uncle! He chuckled. Oh, he's having a bit of a bad day. He's in the basement. I wouldn't go down there if I were you. The basement. My father never went to the basement. I didn't answer. I didn't grab coffee. I turned and ran toward the basement door. If I thought the living room scene was a nightmare, I wasn't prepared for what I was about to find in the darkness downstairs. The Cold War was over. The real battle had just begun. The door to the basement was a heavy, solid oak slab. My hand hovered over the brass knob, trembling. Behind me, the kitchen was bright, filled with the smell of sizzling bacon and the cheerful whistling of the man who was slowly stealing my life, but in front of me. Behind that wood was the unknown. I gripped the knob. It was cold, ice cold. I turned it, expecting it to be locked, but it clicked open. A draft of stale, damp air rushed up to meet me. It smelled of mildew, old cardboard, and something metallic like the scent of rusted iron. I stepped onto the landing. Dad, I whispered. My voice didn't even travel past the first step. The darkness down there felt thick, like it had weight. I closed the door behind me, shutting out the kitchen, shutting out Steve. I needed the silence. I flipped the light switch at the top of the stairs. Nothing happened. The bulb was blown. Of course it was. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The stairs were wooden, unfinished, and they creaked under my weight as I began to descend. Creak, creak, creak. Each step felt like I was walking deeper into the belly of a beast. Our basement was huge. It spanned the entire footprint of the house. Half of it was finished. A rec room we never used, with a dusty pool table and a leather sofa from the 90s. The other half was the utility area, the furnace, the water heater, the storage boxes. Dad! I called out again, a little louder this time. Silence. Just the low, rhythmic hum of the furnace kicking in. Whir. I swept my flashlight beam across the rec room. Empty. The pool table was covered in a plastic sheet that looked like a shroud. The sofa was empty. Panic started to claw at my throat. Steve said he was down here. Was he lying? Did he do something to him? Was my father even in the house? I moved toward the unfinished side. The concrete floor was cold through my socks. This area was a maze of support beams and stacked boxes of holiday decorations. Dad, it's Sneha. Please. And then I heard it. A scratch! A frantic scratching sound like a rat in the walls. It was coming from behind the furnace unit in the far corner where the sump pump was. I moved around the massive metal body of the HVAC system, my heart pounding so hard I felt dizzy. I rounded the corner and shone the light down. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. My father wasn't dead, but the man sitting there wasn't the father I knew. He was huddled on the floor, sitting on an old camping sleeping bag. He was wearing his pyjamas, but over them he wore a thick winter coat. He looked tiny, frail, but it was what he was doing that terrified me. He was surrounded by notebooks, dozens of them, spiral-bound dollar store notebooks, and he was writing. He was scribbling furiously with a pen, the scratching sound echoing off the concrete walls. He didn't look up when the light hit him. He just kept writing. Dad? I dropped to my knees beside him. Dad, what are you doing? He flinched violently, dropping the pen. He looked at me with wild, dilated eyes. He scrambled backward, pressing his spine against the cinder block wall. Turn it off, he hissed, shielding his eyes. Turn off the light. They'll see the gap under the door. Dad, it's me. It's Sneha. I lowered the phone, pointing the beam at the floor so it wasn't blinding him. Nobody is here, just me. He blinked, his chest heaving. Slowly, recognition dawned on his face. Sneha? Yeah, Dad, I'm here. He lunged forward. For a second, I thought he was going to hug me. Instead, he grabbed my wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong, almost painful. His hands were freezing. Did you drink the coffee? He asked, his voice a frantic whisper. Did you eat the food? What? No, I just came down. Good. He released my wrist and started gathering the notebooks, clutching them to his chest like they were gold bars. Don't eat anything he makes. Don't drink the tea she brews. Never. Dad, you're scaring me. Why are you down here? Steve is upstairs cooking pancakes. There are legal papers on the table. We need to go up there and... No! He shouted it, the sound bouncing off the low ceiling. Then he immediately covered his mouth, eyes darting to the ceiling vents. He pointed up. I looked up. The metal ductwork ran along the ceiling. I could hear faint footsteps above us. Steve, walking in the kitchen. He walks heavy, Dad whispered, tears welling up in his eyes. He walks like he owns the floor, but I hear him. I write it all down. I looked at the notebook scattered on the floor. I picked one up. My father tried to snatch it back, but I held it away. Dad, let me see. I opened the notebook. It wasn't nonsense. It wasn't the scribbles of a madman. It was a log, a detailed, meticulous log. October 12th, 8:45 p.m. Steve arrived. Truck license plate confirmed. I flipped the pages. There were months of this, years. Every entry was dated and timed. I picked up another notebook. This one was different. It was full of numbers. Financial figures. Withdrawal $5,000. Joint account. Authorised by her. My stomach churned. I looked at my father. He wasn't hallucinating. He was investigating. He had been documenting the systematic theft of his fortune and his marriage from a freezing corner of his own basement. Dad, I whispered, my voice trembling. Why didn't you show this to anyone? Why didn't you go to the police? He let out a dry, broken sob. He reached into the pocket of his winter coat and pulled out a small orange prescription bottle. He rattled it. Because of these, he said. I took the bottle. The label read Risperidone, Dr. Hamid. Antipsychotics, heavy ones used for schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. I don't have a prescription for this, Dad, I said, confused. Who gave you these? She did, he whispered, 2 years ago. She told the doctor I was seeing things. She told him I was violent. She cried in the office, Sneha. She cried so beautifully. The doctor believed her. He gave her the pills to calm me down. He leaned in closer, his breath smelling of stale coffee and fear. But I don't take them, he hissed. I pretend. I put them under my tongue. I spit them out in the toilet. But if I don't act crazy, she tries to double the dose. She puts it in my tea. She grinds it into my food. The horror of what he was saying washed over me like ice water. This wasn't just an affair. This was systematic poisoning. This was gaslighting on a criminal level. They were drugging him to make him pliable, to make him look incompetent so they could take control of the estate. The legal papers upstairs, the power of attorney. They want me to sign today, Dad said, his voice trembling. That's why he's here so early. That's why he's cooking. They're going to bring the papers down here. They are going to tell me it's for the insurance or the taxes. And if I don't sign... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I looked at my father. This man who had built a life from nothing, who had loved us, who had been reduced to a shivering detective in his own basement, and I felt something inside me snap. The fear evaporated, the anxiety vanished. All that was left was a cold, hard rage. You're not signing anything, I said, my voice steady. Sneha, you don't understand. Steve, he's dangerous. He knows people. If we fight him... We aren't just going to fight him, Dad, I said, standing up and helping him to his feet. We're going to bury him. But just as I said those words, the basement door at the top of the stairs creaked open. Light flooded down the staircase. Sneha! Steve's voice boomed down, cheerful and terrifying. Breakfast is ready. Why don't you bring Uncle up? We have some business to discuss. My father froze. He gripped my arm, his fingernails digging into my skin. Don't let them take me, he whimpered. Please! I looked at the stairs. I looked at the shadow of the man standing at the top. Coming, Steve? I called back. My voice was calm, eerily calm. I turned to my father. I took the prescription bottle and shoved it into my pocket. I took the notebook with the financial logs and tucked it into the back of my jeans, covering it with my shirt. Dad, I said, grabbing his shoulders and looking him dead in the eye. Listen to me. We are going to go upstairs. You are going to sit at the table. You're going to act exactly like the crazy old man they think you are. Can you do that? He looked at me, confusion clouding his eyes. What? Why? Because, I whispered, a dark plan forming in my mind. If they think you're broken, they won't see the knife coming in until it's too late. Trust me. He took a shaky breath, nodded and slumped his shoulders, putting the mask of the broken man back on. We walked toward the stairs. As we ascended, leaving the safety of the dark basement for the bright, deceptive kitchen above, I knew one thing for sure. The girl who drove down from Toronto yesterday was a victim. The woman walking up these stairs was a hunter, but I wasn't prepared for what Steve had waiting for us at the kitchen table. I thought it was just papers. I thought it was just threats. I was wrong. Sitting at the table next to the stack of documents that was a guest I never expected to see. Someone who changed the entire game. As my head cleared the top of the stairs, I saw her and my heart stopped. I stood at the top of the stairs, my hand still gripping my father's trembling arm. The kitchen was flooded with morning sunlight, so bright it hurt my eyes after the gloom of the basement. But it wasn't the light that blinded me. It was the person sitting at the kitchen table, my sister, Maya. She was sitting opposite the empty chair meant for my father. She was dressed in a smart blazer, looking like she had just come from a business meeting, but her face was pale. She was staring at her hands, twisting her wedding ring round and round. Maya! I breathed out. As she looked up, her eyes darted from me to Dad, and I saw a flash of guilt so raw it made my stomach lurch. Hi, Sneha, she whispered. She didn't get up. She didn't smile. Oh, what are you doing here? I asked, guiding Dad into the room. You live in Ottawa. You didn't tell me you were coming. Before she could answer, Steve turned from the stove. He placed a platter of pancakes on the table with a theatrical thud. I called her, Steve said, wiping his hands on the apron, my father's apron. We needed a family meeting, a full family meeting. Sit down, Uncle. You look pale. He pulled out a chair for my father. Not gently, he grabbed the back of the chair and shoved it toward Dad's legs, forcing him to sit or fall. Dad collapsed into the seat, his eyes fixed on the tablecloth, his hands shaking in his lap. My mother was sitting at the head of the table. She was sipping her tea, looking perfectly composed. She didn't look at Dad. She looked at the papers. I sat down next to Maya. I leaned in close. Did you know about this? I hissed. The power of attorney? The will? Maya bit her lip. She looked at Steve, then at Mom. Sneha, it's for the best. Dad isn't. He's not well. You know that. He's been getting worse. Mom can't handle the finances alone anymore. Steve is just trying to help organise things. Steve is just trying to help. The script. They were all reading from the same script. Maya, I whispered, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. Do you have any idea what is actually happening in this house? Enough, Sneha. Mum cut in sharply. She set her teacup down. We are not doing this. We are not having a scene. We are here to sign papers so that we can protect your father's assets before he loses his faculties completely. Loses his faculties? I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. He seems pretty lucid to me, Mom. He knows exactly who is in this room. He knows exactly who is sleeping in his bed. The room went deathly silent. My mother's eyes narrowed. Steve stopped chewing his bacon. He looked at me, a smirk playing on his lips. He enjoyed this. He loved the chaos. Uncle is confused, Steve said, leaning back in his chair, picking his teeth. He imagines things, monsters in the closet, affairs in the living room. It's sad, really. That's why he needs us to take the wheel. He reached out and tapped the stack of blue legal documents. This gives Auntie full control, Steve explained, looking at me but speaking to Maya. And since Auntie isn't good with numbers, it names me as the primary executor and advisor, just to keep the books balanced. I felt the notebook I had hidden in my waistband burning against my skin. The notebook where Dad had tracked thousands of dollars flowing into Steve's construction. And if he doesn't sign, I asked. Steve's smile vanished. His eyes went flat. Then the bank freezes the accounts. The house goes into lien. And Uncle here, well, the doctors say he might need a full-time facility, a nice one, far away, where he can get specialised care. It was a threat, plain and simple. Sign the papers or we put him in an asylum. I looked at Dad. He was shrinking into his chair. He understood. He knew exactly what they were saying. I don't want to go away, Dad whispered. His voice was so small, it broke my heart. Then sign, Uncle, Steve said softly. He picked up a heavy, expensive fountain pen. Just sign right here and you can stay in your room and you can have your garden. Nobody has to go anywhere. Steve stood up. He walked around the table to where Dad was sitting. This was it, the moment of the forbidden touch. Steve didn't just hand Dad the pen. He leaned over him, his large frame casting a shadow over my father. He placed the pen in Dad's shaking hand. Then he covered Dad's hand with his own large, rough hand. It was a violation. It was intimate and violent all at once. He was physically forcing my father's hand toward the paper. Right here, Steve whispered into Dad's ear. Just an X. If you can't write your name, we'll accept an X. My father's hand was shaking so hard the pen was skittering across the paper. He was hyperventilating. No, Dad whimpered. No, please. Help him, Maya, Mum said, looking at my sister. He's struggling. Maya looked like she was about to be sick. She reached out a hand but pulled it back. She couldn't do it. She couldn't be part of the physical act. Sign it, old man, Steve hissed. The nice guy mask was slipping. His grip on Dad's hand tightened. I saw Dad grimace in pain. I looked at the table. In the centre, there was a fresh pot of tea. And next to my father's plate, a glass of water. The water was slightly cloudy. And then I remembered the bottle in my pocket. Risperidone. I looked at the water. I looked at Steve, forcing my father's hand. I looked at my mother's cold indifference. I stood up. I didn't just stand up. I exploded upward. Get your hands off him! I screamed it so loud that Maya jumped in her seat. Steve froze. He didn't let go of Dad's hand and he looked up at me, annoyed. Sit down, Sneha. The adults are talking, I said. I lowered my voice to a lethal growl. Get your filthy hands off my father. I grabbed the glass of cloudy water from the table. And don't you dare make him drink this. Mum stood up now. Sneha, that is his medicine. Dr. Hamid prescribed it. He needs it to stay calm. Medicine? I laughed. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the orange pill bottle I had taken from the basement. I slammed it onto the table. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. You mean this medicine? I asked. The antipsychotics for severe schizophrenia. The ones you told the doctor he needed because he was violent. The ones you've been grinding into his food to make him compliant. Maya stared at the bottle. She picked it up. She read the label. Mum, Maya asked, her voice trembling. This is risperidone. This is heavy stuff. Why is Dad on this? You told me it was just for anxiety. He is sick, Mum shrieked. Her composure was cracking. He hallucinates. He thinks I'm cheating on him. He thinks Steve is stealing from us. He is crazy, Maya. Is he? I walked around the table and stood between Steve and Dad. I pushed Steve back, physically pushed him. He stumbled, surprised by my force. I pulled the notebook from my back. I threw it on the table next to the pills. It fell open to the page with the bank transfers. Is he hallucinating the $12,000 you paid Steve for a roof that was never fixed? I asked, looking straight at my mother. Is he hallucinating the $5,000 cash withdrawal last week? Or the fact that Steve has a key to the master bedroom? Steve's face darkened. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked dangerous. He took a step toward me. You're crossing a line, little girl, he said. His voice was low, menacing. You don't know what you're talking about. Those are legitimate expenses. Then show me the receipts, I challenged him. I'm a financial analyst, Steve. That's literally my job. Show me the invoices. Show me the tax returns for Steve's construction. Right now. He didn't move. He couldn't because they didn't exist. And as for the hallucinations, I turned to Maya. Last night at 2 a.m, I went downstairs. I saw them in the living room. I pointed a shaking finger at Mom. She was stroking his hair. They were on the couch. It wasn't a hallucination, Maya. It was foreplay. Maya looked at Mom. She looked at Steve. The colour drained from her face. The realisation hit her like a physical blow. The helpful cousin narrative fell apart in an instant. Mum, Maya whispered, is that true? Mum didn't answer. She sat down slowly, her face turning into a mask of stone. She looked at the wall, refusing to make eye contact. Her silence was a confession. Get out, I said to Steve. Steve laughed. It was a dry, humourless sound. Get out! Honey, I'm the executor. I'm the power of attorney. This is my house. Not yet, it isn't, I said, grabbing the legal papers from under Dad's hand. I didn't tear them up. That's dramatic, but stupid. I folded them and put them in my pocket. Evidence. We aren't signing, I said, and if you don't get out of this house in the next 5 minutes, I'm calling the police. I have the pills, I have the cloudy water, I have the notebooks, and I have a very good lawyer in Toronto who would love to hear about elder abuse and fraud. Steve stared at me. For a moment, I thought he was going to hit me. I saw his fists clench. I saw the violence in his eyes. He calculated the odds. 2 daughters, 1 old man, 1 wife who is currently catatonic with shame. He sneered. You think you're smart, Sneha, but you have no idea what you've just started. He leaned down right into my face. You can keep the old man, he whispered. He's broken anyway. But the money is already gone. He straightened up, grabbed his car keys from the counter and walked out. The back door slammed, then the roar of his truck engine, then silence. The 4 of us were left in the kitchen. Maya was crying silently. Mum was staring at the wall. I turned to Dad. He was shaking. He looked terrified. Is he gone? Dad whispered. Is the bad man gone? Yeah, Dad, I said, my knees finally giving out. I sat down on the chair next to him. He's gone. But as I looked at my mother, sitting there like a statue, I realised Steve was right. The battle wasn't over. Steve leaving was the easy part, dealing with the aftermath, the money, the betrayal, and the woman sitting at the head of the table who had orchestrated it all was going to be the real nightmare. And then my father did something that chilled me to the bone. He stopped shaking. He sat up straight. He looked at the door where Steve had just exited and he smiled. Not a happy smile, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a smile of pure, unadulterated malice. He thinks the money is gone, Dad whispered. He looked at me and for the first time in years, his eyes were crystal clear. The fog was gone. He doesn't know about the safe, Dad said. He doesn't know about the other notebook. My heart skipped a beat. What other notebook, Dad? Dad tapped his temple. The one where I wrote down his secrets, not the money secrets, the real secrets, the ones that send people to jail for life. He looked at Mum. Isn't that right, Martha? He asked her. He used her name. Mum flinched. She looked at him with genuine terror. I realised then that I had it all wrong. My father wasn't just a victim. He had been playing a game too, a long, patient game. And now with Steve gone, the gloves were coming off. Dad, I asked, what is in the safe? He looked at me and the madness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard intelligence that was terrifying to behold. The truth about what happened to Steve's first wife, he whispered. I froze. Steve's first wife died in a car accident 10 years ago, or so we were told. Dad leaned in. It wasn't an accident. The kitchen spun. The floor felt like it was dropping out from under me. We had just kicked the wolf out of the house, but now I was realising that we might be locked in with something much darker. This wasn't just fraud. This was a murder mystery, and my parents were the keepers of the secret. The word murder doesn't just hang in the air. It sucks the oxygen right out of the room. For a solid 10 seconds, nobody breathed. The kitchen, which had just been a battlefield of shouting and shoving, turned into a tomb. My father, the man who had been trembling like a leaf 5 minutes ago, was now sitting bolt upright, his eyes locked on my mother with a predator's intensity. Dad, I whispered, breaking the silence. What did you say? He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on Mom. Tell them, Martha. Tell them about Elena. Tell them about the rainy night on Highway 6 10 years ago. Tell them why Steve really owns this house. My mother looked like she was shrinking. Her posture, usually so rigid and proud, collapsed. She brought a manicured hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with a terror that wasn't about being caught. It was about being hunted. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, but her voice was thin, brittle. Liar! Dad slammed his hand on the table. It was sudden, violent. The teacups rattled. Then just as quickly as the rage appeared, it vanished. His face slackened and his eyes darted to the corner of the room, tracking something invisible. The spiders, he muttered, scratching at his neck. They're listening in the walls. We have to be quiet. Shh. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the descent. The adrenaline that had given him that moment of clarity was fading, and the years of psychological torture and the drugs in his system were clawing him back down. Dad, stay with me, I said, grabbing his hand. It was clammy. You said there's a safe. You said you have proof. Where is it? He looked at me, blinking rapidly. The safe? No safe, not safe here. He has keys. He has keys to everything. The hidden notebook, Dad? Where is the other notebook? He giggled, a high-pitched, childish childish sound that made the hair on my arm stand up. In the belly of the beast. We have to cut it out. I looked at Maya. She was terrified. Sneha, he's losing it again. Maybe we should just call the cops now. And tell them what? I snapped. That our dad, who has a documented history of psychosis, thanks to Mum, is claiming our cousin is a murderer. Steve will spin this. He'll say Dad is off his meds. He'll show them the power of attorney papers. We need the physical proof. I turned back to Dad. I needed to anchor him. I grabbed his face in my hands. Dad, look at me. I am Sneha. I am your daughter. I kicked Steve out. He is gone, but he will come back. If you want to save this family, if you want to save me, you have to tell me where the proof is. Right now. Something in my voice pierced the fog. He stopped giggling. He looked at me and a tear leaked out of his eye. The guest room, he whispered. The vent, behind the vent. I didn't waste a second. Maya, watch the doors. Lock everything. Mum, you stay right there. I sprinted out of the kitchen, down the hallway to the guest room, my father's exile chamber for the last 5 years. The room smelled of stale air and unwashed laundry. It was depressing. A single bed, a small TV, and darkness. I scanned the room. The air return vent was near the floor, screwed into the drywall. I fell to my knees. I didn't have a screwdriver. I grabbed a dime from the nightstand and used it to twist the screws. 1, 2. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped the coin twice. Come on, come on. I pulled the metal grate off. Inside it was filled with dust bunnies and grey lint. I reached my hand into the dark ductwork. I felt around. Cold metal. Dust. Nothing. No, I whispered. Don't be crazy, Dad. Please don't be crazy. I reached deeper, scraping my forearm against the sharp metal edge. My fingers brushed against something, not metal, plastic. I grabbed it and pulled. It was a heavy-duty Ziploc bag. Inside, taped shut, was a black leather-bound journal and a USB drive. I sat back on my heels, clutching the bag to my chest, letting out a breath I didn't know I was holding. He wasn't crazy. I ran back to the kitchen. Dad was rocking back and forth in his chair now, humming a nursery rhyme. Mum was crying silently, her head in her hands. I threw the bag on the table. I found it. I ripped the bag open. I opened the journal. This wasn't a log of expenses. This was a crime dossier. There were pasted newspaper clippings from 10 years ago. A local woman dies in tragic highway accident. Brake failure suspected in Stony Creek crash. And underneath the clippings, my father's handwriting, shaky but legible. June 4th, Steve came to the house at 3 a.m. He was covered in mud and he was crying. He told me Elena was going to leave him. He told me she was going to take the truck. June 5th, I saw the truck. The brake line wasn't frayed. It was cut. I saw the tool marks. June 6th, he told me if I said anything, he would do the same to Martha. He said family protects family. I felt sick, physically sick. My father hadn't just been witnessing an affair. He had been a hostage. For 10 years, he had been living with the knowledge that his nephew was a killer and that if he spoke up, his wife would be next. You knew, I said, turning to Mum. The rage I felt was colder than ice. You knew he killed Elena. Mum looked up. Her mascara was running down her face. She looked like a ghost. I suspected, she whispered. Steve, he has a way of making you afraid. He told me your father was losing his mind. He told me the accident was just an accident, but that your father was obsessed with it. So you slept with him, I screamed. To what? To comfort him? No, Mum shrieked. Because he made me. He said if I didn't keep him happy, if I didn't let him into the house, he would frame your father for the fraud. He said he would plant evidence. Sneha, you don't know him. He is a monster. And you let the monster into our bed, Dad suddenly yelled. He wasn't rocking anymore. He was standing up. His face was red. You let him touch you, Dad roared. I saw you. You liked it. Don't lie, Martha. You liked the power. You liked that he was young and strong. And I was just the old man paying the bills. Dad, stop. Maya stepped in, but Dad was spiraling. And the anger was triggering the psychosis. He started pacing the kitchen, grabbing his hair. He's coming back, Dad muttered, his eyes wide and frantic. He knows the notebook is gone. He feels it. He has cameras. Did you check for cameras, Sneha? He has eyes in the smoke detectors. He grabbed a chair and smashed it against the floor. Dad! I tried to grab him, but he shoved me away with surprising strength. Get down, he screamed. They're shooting. The spiders are shooting. He dove under the kitchen table, curling into a fetal position, covering his ears. My heart broke. The man who had meticulously documented a murder was gone, replaced by the broken shell Steve had created. We need to go, I said to Maya. Grab the journal, grab the laptop. We are driving to the police station right now. We can't stay here. I'm not leaving him, Mum sobbed. sobbed, reaching for Dad under the table. April, don't touch me, Dad screamed, kicking at her. Traitor! Whore! Mum, get the car keys, I ordered. Maya, help me get Dad up. We dragged Dad out from under the table. He was dead weight, mumbling about wiretaps and brake lines. We half carried, half dragged him toward the front door. I opened the front door and I stopped dead. My car, my trusty sedan that I had parked in the driveway just yesterday, it was blocked. Steve's truck wasn't there, but across the end of our long driveway, a massive pile of gravel had been dumped. A literal mountain of construction gravel blocking the exit to the road. What the... Maya breathed. And then my phone pinged. I looked down, a text message from an unknown number. Reviewing the footage from the kitchen. Nice performance, Sneha. But you forgot one thing. My blood ran cold. Ping, a second text. I didn't leave because I was scared. I left to go get my tools. And then the power cut out. The house plunged into darkness. The hum of the refrigerator died. The lights vanished. The only light came from the grey, overcast sky outside. He cut the line, I whispered. Who? Mum asked, her voice trembling in the dark. Steve, I said, clutching the notebook to my chest. He's not gone. He's watching us. He's here, Dad whispered from the floor. He wasn't screaming anymore. He sounded eerily calm. He's in the basement. He has a key to the bulkhead. We heard a sound, a heavy metal clank coming from the other side of the house. The sound of the basement storm doors being thrown open. We were trapped. The gravel blocked the car. The power was gone. My father was hallucinating, and a murderer who had already killed once and gotten away with it was coming up the basement stairs. Lock the door to the basement, I hissed at Maya. It doesn't have a lock, she cried. I looked around the foyer. We were defenceless. Upstairs, I commanded. Everyone upstairs now. To the master bedroom, it has the heavy bolt. We scrambled up the stairs in the semi-darkness. I could hear heavy boots walking on the hardwood floor below us. Slow, deliberate. Thud, thud, thud. Honey, I'm home. Steve's voice echoed up the stairwell. He wasn't shouting. He was singing it. A twisted, mocking melody. We burst into the master bedroom. My mother's room. I slammed the door and threw the deadbolt. Maya dragged to the heavy dresser in front of the door. We huddled in the corner of the room. Dad was curled up on the rug, rocking back and forth. Mum was hyperventilating. I looked at the notebook in my hand. This was it. This was the reason he was here. He couldn't let this leave the house. If this got out, he went to prison for life. If we died, well, it would just be a tragic family murder-suicide caused by a deranged father. That was his plan. I saw it clearly now. He would kill us all, put the gun in Dad's hand and tell the police. I tried to stop him, but he was crazy. I looked at the window. We were on the second floor. It was a 20-foot drop to the concrete patio. Sneha, Maya whispered, clutching her phone. No signal. The reception is dead. He uses a jammer, Dad mumbled from the floor. He used it on Elena too, so she couldn't call for help. I looked at the door. The handle jiggled. Then a heavy knock. Knock, knock, knock. Open up, family, Steve said from the hallway. I just want to talk. I brought my hammer. I looked around the room for a weapon. A lamp, a vase. Nothing was heavy enough. And then I saw it. My father's eyes. He had stopped rocking. He was looking at the nightstand on my mother's side of the bed. He was pointing at it. The bottom drawer, Dad whispered. Martha's insurance. I looked at Mum. She was shaking her head violently. No, no. I ran to the nightstand. I ripped open the bottom drawer. Underneath a pile of silk scarves, I felt cold steel. A gun, a snub-nosed revolver. I pulled it out. It was heavy. You have a gun? I asked Mum, shocked. He gave it to me, she sobbed. Steve gave it to me for protection when he wasn't around. The irony was sickening. The weapon meant to protect the affair was now the only thing standing between us and death. I checked the cylinder. Loaded. The door handle rattled violently. Then a massive crash. The wood splintered. He was kicking it in. The dresser shifted. Sneha! Steve called out, his voice low and guttural. Give me the book and I make it quick. Don't. And I start with Maya. I raised the gun. My hands were shaking, but my resolve wasn't. Stand back, I screamed. You won't shoot. Steve laughed. You're a corporate girl. You analyse spreadsheets. You don't pull triggers. Crash. A foot broke through the door panel. I saw his boot. I looked at Dad. He looked at me, and for the first time in 5 years, he looked proud. Aim for the chest, Dad whispered. I cocked the hammer. The door was giving way. The wood groaned. The hinges screamed. The monster was coming in, and I realised with a terrifying clarity that only one of us was walking out of this room alive. Rack. The sound of the door frame splintering was louder than I expected. It sounded like a bone snapping. I stood there, my feet planted on my mother's expensive Persian rug, holding a .38 caliber revolver with both hands. My arms were shaking so violently that the barrel of the gun was vibrating, but my eyes were steady. Another kick. Boom! The heavy oak dresser Maya and I had dragged in front of the door shifted 3 inches. A cloud of drywall dust puffed into the room. Through the jagged hole in the wood, I saw him. Steve. He wasn't smiling anymore. His face was a mask of pure, concentrated animal rage. He held a framing hammer in his right hand, the claw end facing out. "Last chance, Sneha!" he roared, his voice muffled by the wood, but clear enough to freeze the blood in my veins. "Open the door, give me the book, and nobody gets hurt. You make me come in there, and I paint the walls with you." "I'm going to shoot!" I screamed back. My voice sounded foreign to me, high, shrill, terrified. "I swear to God, Steve, I will kill you." "You don't have the guts." He took a step back and threw his entire body weight against the door. Crash! The wood gave way, the lock shattered, the dresser toppled over with a deafening thud, spilling clothes everywhere. Steve stepped over the debris. He looked massive in the small room, the hammer hung loose in his hand. He scanned us, Mum cowering in the corner, Maya weeping silently, Dad curled on the floor, and me. He looked at the gun in my hand and sneered. "Safety's on, sweetheart." It was a trick, an old movie cliche, but for a split second I looked down at the gun. That was all he needed. He lunged. "No!" Dad screamed. The frail old man, who had spent 5 years shuffling around in slippers, exploded from the floor. He didn't have strength, but he had momentum. He threw himself at Steve's legs, tackling him just as he reached me. Steve stumbled, roaring in surprise. The hammer swung wildly, missing my head by inches and smashing into the vanity mirror. Glass exploded everywhere. "Run, Sneha!" Dad yelled, clinging to Steve's boot like a pit bull. "Shoot him!" Steve kicked backward, hard. His heavy work boot connected with my father's ribs. I heard the crack. Dad groaned and rolled away, gasping for air. Steve regained his balance and turned to me. His eyes were black holes. He raised the hammer. "You stupid bitch," he hissed. "I didn't think, I didn't analyse, I didn't check the safety." I squeezed the trigger. Bang! The sound was deafening, and it was like a grenade went off in the room. The recoil jerked my arms up. My ears rang with a high-pitched whine. Steve stopped. He looked down at his stomach. A dark red stain was blooming on his grey t-shirt, spreading fast. He looked back up at me, shock replacing the anger. You shot me. "Stay back," I screamed, cocking the hammer again. "Get on the ground." He took a step toward me. He was a bull. "One bullet wasn't enough. I'm going to kill you," he whispered, blood bubbling on his lips. He raised the hammer again. "Mom!" Maya screamed. And then, movement from the corner. My mother. The woman who had sat silently for 5 years. The woman who had let this monster into our home. She didn't grab the gun. She grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the dresser, a wedding gift from 30 years ago. She stepped up behind Steve and brought it down on the back of his head with a primal scream. Smash! Steve's eyes rolled back. His knees buckled. He collapsed forward, hitting the floor with a heavy, meaty thud. The hammer skittered across the floor, sliding under the bed. Silent. Absolute ringing silence. Smoke drifted from the barrel of the gun, the smell of gunpowder mixed with the scent of my mother's lavender perfume. Steve groaned on the floor, writhing in pain, clutching his gut. He was alive, but he wasn't getting up. I kept the gun trained on him. "Maya!" I gasped, my chest heaving. "Get the zip ties, Dad's drawer, top shelf." Maya scrambled. We bound his hands behind his back. Only when he was tied up did I finally lower the gun. I looked at my father. He was holding his side, his face grey with pain, but he was smiling. He looked at Mum. Mum was standing over Steve's body, staring at her hands. She looked broken. "Why, Martha?" Dad whispered from the floor. "Why did you wait so long?" Mum slowly sank to her knees. She didn't look at us. She looked at Steve. "Because I was afraid," she whispered. He told me he had videos of me, of us." I felt bile rise in my throat. Blackmail. "He said if I ever tried to leave him, he would send them to everyone, to the church, to your friends." She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. I just wanted to protect our reputation, Sneha. I didn't want the shame." The shame, I laughed, and it sounded hysterical. "Mum, you almost got us murdered. You drugged Dad. You let a killer take over our lives because you were worried about what the neighbours would think." "I'm sorry," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I'm so sorry. The sound of sirens cut through the air. Maya had managed to get a signal, or maybe the neighbours heard the gunshot. It didn't matter. The cavalry was coming. The aftermath, 3 months later. The snow is falling in Toronto today. It's beautiful. It covers everything in a clean white blanket. I wish it could cover memories the same way. I'm sitting in a coffee shop on Queen Street looking out at the pedestrians. My phone buzzes. It's Maya. Dad's appointment went well. Dr. Reynolds says the toxicity levels are almost zero. He recognised me today without pausing. I smile, but it's a sad smile. The police investigation was swift and brutal. Once we handed over the notebook and the USB drive from the vent, the house of cards Steve built collapsed instantly. The USB drive didn't just contain evidence of the brake line tampering from 10 years ago. It had recordings. Steve liked to keep trophies that he had recorded his own confession on a drunken night. Steve is currently in a maximum security holding facility awaiting trial for first-degree murder, attempted murder, fraud and extortion. He pleads not guilty, of course, but with the bullet hole in his gut and my father's journals, he's never seeing the light of day again. But justice for Steve doesn't fix what broke in our house. My mother, that was the hardest part. The police didn't charge her with the murder plot. She turned state's witness against Steve, but they charged her with negligence and accessory to fraud. She took a plea deal, house arrest and probation. But the legal punishment is nothing compared to the reality. Dad filed for divorce the day he got out of the hospital. He didn't yell. He didn't fight. He just looked at her in the hospital room and said, I can forgive the fear, Martha, but I can't forgive the pills. You tried to erase my mind. He lives with me now in my condo in the city. He sleeps in the guest room, but this time the door is always open. He spends his days gardening on my balcony and writing a real book. Not a log of crimes, but a memoir. He's healing slowly. But sometimes late at night, I hear him wake up screaming. I have to go in and hold his hand until he realises he's not in the basement anymore. And Mum, she lives alone in that big empty house by the lake. The reputation she tried so hard to save is gone. The community knows everything. Nobody visits. She walks through those silent rooms haunted by the ghost of the marriage she destroyed and the lover who used her. As for me, I went back to work. I analysed spreadsheets. I look for discrepancies, but I'm different now. I realise that evil doesn't always look like a monster in a movie. Sometimes it looks like a charming cousin who offers to fix your roof. Sometimes it looks like a mother who turns a blind eye to keep the peace. And sometimes the scariest thing isn't the noise in the basement, it's the silence at the dinner table. I took the gun, the one I used to shoot Steve, and I turned it into the police. But the feeling of the trigger, the weight of the decision to end a life that stays with you, it changed me. I realised that family isn't about blood. Blood is what Steve shared with us. Blood is what I spilled on the rug. A family is about who stands next to you when the door is being kicked down. So that's my story. It's not a fairy tale. There is no happily ever after. There is just after. We survived. We are scarred. We are broken and we are separated, but we are free. And my father, last night he laughed. A real genuine belly laugh at a TV show. It was the most beautiful sound I have ever heard. If you're listening to this and you feel like something is wrong in your home, if the silence feels too heavy, if the explanations don't add up, don't ignore it. Don't let the peace suffocate you. Break the silence before it breaks you. I'm Sneha. Thank you for listening to Our Truth. Stay safe and watch who you let into your house.